All right. Well, good morning, everyone. This is officially our first podcast of the year for the MPN Hub. Yay! We're gonna start this year the right way. It's gonna be a fun year. It's gonna be a great year for everyone, for us at the MPN Hub, but also professionally, personally. We'll put those positive affirmations out there. Welcome to our monthly roundtable, where we are unpacking my CRAVE leadership model with neuroplasticity. This month, we are discussing vulnerability, one of my favorite topics. And hopefully, we all get to be a little vulnerable with some of the questions and topics and scenarios that we're going to discuss. I am your host, Dr. Amin Sanaia, author, speaker, and coach. But let's go around the table and we have new people joining us to our round table, and let's get to know you a little bit more. To my right is Dr. JJ. So you can go, and then I'll pass the baton on to the next person.
Well, I'm really delighted to be here at the first event for the year. So thanks for hosting. I mean, I was in my room and thinking, where on earth is everybody today? This is going to be a bad year. And obviously, I worked out my faux pas just in time. So thanks for hosting today. I mean, there's been such great feedback from everybody for your facilitating style, and we are building a new architecture for the hubs in the new year. And I was hoping to ask you to host this event as part of the communication hub into the future, because you're doing it so well, and we're all learning from you so beautifully. So I'm hoping to ask you if you're interested in having that opportunity. We can speak about it afterwards if you like, but thank you, my friend.
You're welcome. So to the right of you is Liz.
Hi, everybody. So I am been a member of the Hub since the summer and became certified in November. And I am based in Charleston, South Carolina in the States, and do leadership coaching as well as facilitating and strategic advising, all with a neuroscience and neuroplasticity bent.
Absolutely. Welcome, Liz. Dave is next.
Dave's just a handsome guy listening in here. So my background is learning and development. I have certifications in advanced team coaching and performance, etc. And I received my certification January 5th.
Awesome, Dave. Jennifer.
Hi, everybody. It's really good to be here in a live. I am Jennifer, and I'm a professional neuroplastician. I just came into the Hub last month, so super fresh. And I'm a brain retraining specialist and mentor. So I do coaching one-on-one, helping people, coaching through the unconscious mind. And I am here in Texas.
Awesome. Oh, you're not too far from us. All right, welcome. Tanner. I'm hungry.
Morning, my name's Tanner Thorpe. I'm a thought leader and a professional with background in culinary. Just super excited to be a part of these roundtables. We've been having a lot of fun on them. I'm relatively new to the Hub also. Came on board back in October, November, and just have been really enjoying this. I also host my own roundtable called Food, the Universal Language. And we've done one roundtable. We have another one coming up. So would love to have others join if you're interested in food and its effect on our minds and our bodies. And yeah, let's have a great roundtable.
Awesome. Last but not least, Dr. Cody.
Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Cody Deal. My PhD is in neurophysiology, and I have a research fellowship in Alzheimer's and dementia research. My research looks at the effects of aging on cognition and other neurodegenerative diseases.
Great, welcome. Oh, I got one more. I'm sorry, I apologize. Michael has joined us. Michael, tell us a little bit about you.
Oh, hi everyone. Nice to join you. It's quite late here. I had to get up, so I'm apologizing for my bleary eyes. I'm speaking to you from Melbourne, Australia. I work in coaching and training. I'm an associate of an outfit called the Asian Leadership Institute Executive Coaching. I use mindfulness as a baseline for the work that I do, specifically positive neuroplasticity. And I've been a neuroplastician officially about 24 hours. So it's very exciting to join. Yay.
Awesome, congratulations.
Thank you.
All right, well, I think we have everybody now. Let me make sure I didn't miss anybody. Yep, we got everybody. All right, thank you everyone for joining us today. So to start off, I'm going to set the stage here. The paradoxical nature of vulnerability in leadership lies in its apparent fragility, yet it yields profound neurological insights. My exploration delves into intricate interplay of vulnerability's emotional tapestry within the brain, showcasing its transformative potential and enduring impact on neural pathways. Since we have newer members joining us for our monthly roundtable, just want to let you know how we do things here so that you're able to really participate. This is a venture that we go on together, so it's not going to be just me speaking. So I will set up a scenario or a question, and then we'll go round table and let everyone chime in. All right, so let's get ready to dive in. So as we look at vulnerability from the sense of a leader, it's a word that really in most professional setting is looked upon as something that is not positive for a leader, which is not true. Vulnerability is probably one of the best qualities a leader or successful leader can have. So if we look at vulnerability in that sense, I want us to start off by discussing an experience that you might have with a leader that has been vulnerable and what that example looks like, or a leader that doesn't show that quality and how is that displayed throughout the team. So who wants to go first? I don't want to have to so let's just go, whoever wants to jump in, go ahead and jump in, and then we'll go from there.
Well, I can
I'll
go
jump
ahead
in.
and start.
Oh.
Or Tanner, do you want to?
No, go ahead, Liz, please.
Okay. So one of the things I did not mention in my introduction is that I am the human member of a dog therapy team. And I have had to learn vulnerability myself because when I do visits with Marcel, my therapy dog, he is the star of the show. And this realization that in, 5-minute, 15-minute interaction, he can have so much more impact than I can have in an hour coaching experience. And how I often know that is that people will stop us on the street and recognize him and talk about what an amazing difference they've made to him. And so having this experience has made this a lot easier. I mean, one, it's very humbling, as well as having to be vulnerable that he has much more impact than I do in shorter time periods, has made it easier for me to talk to leaders about being vulnerable. And even from the standpoint of getting them just to start with saying, I don't know, because I find a lot of leaders, even admitting things that they don't know can be a huge expression of vulnerability. And so by me talking about my experiences with somebody who's not even human, but is an amazing therapist, that I'm finding has a lot of positive impact on humans.
That's really awesome. I think Tanner, you're going to jump in on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak from the standpoint of oftentimes in work cultures, as you mentioned in the beginning, Doctor. I mean, vulnerability is seen as a sign of weakness, and so often coming from a culinary background, you know, the aggressive chef is the one that's glorified. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, you look at Gordon Ramsay in Hell's Kitchen is a perfect example. And what we found over time, what I've found in my own personal experience is you get much weaker results when you are aggressive.
Yes.
And you get much more positive results when you are vulnerable. And when your team recognizes that you can be vulnerable with them and they can be vulnerable with you, it builds trust. And in culinary applications, you know, it's a very high stress environment. You're usually dealing with entry level team members and employees. You're usually dealing with unhappy customers. I mean, you know, we'd like to think that everybody that comes into a dining room or comes into a restaurant or comes into I work in the healthcare field. You know, when you're dealing with people who are in hospitals and in hurting situations, their propensity to be kind can sometimes go down because they're dealing with big issues. And so leading with vulnerability, allowing your team to be vulnerable, allowing them to see you be vulnerable has incredible impactful change.
Yeah, it speaks to that human side of a leader and being relatable to people. If you're able to do that, you're gonna win as a leader. All right, who else wants to jump in there?
I'll go. So I've worked with numerous leaders where, you know, they were very standoffish, and you can tell when there's a team or a group of individuals that respond negatively to that. And, you know, if you want to lead by example, your example should be, for most, warm and welcoming if you want to produce the results and the services that are necessary to all. And so having leaders that are not necessarily as welcoming as they need to be, they don't produce the results that you want. And so having a leader that is open to being human, I think shows a lot to their not only employees, but their team members and the people that look up to them.
With that said, Cody, I know the science behind it is really important to you. So when we look at that, how when a leader admits that they make a mistake, they're being vulnerable, right? The brain orchestrates a synchronized dance involving key regions of our brain. So particularly looking at the insula, prefrontal cortex, amygdala. Talk to us a little bit about that, how that dance occurs.
So if you are the leader that shares a vulnerable trait, or you're listening to a leader that has a vulnerable moment, more often than not, always we have chemical hormones that are playing a role in our decision making and memory forming process and memory recall. And one of those chemicals is called BDNF, brain derived neurotrophic factor. And so when we experience a situation that is seen as pleasurable, or it's not stress inducing, so there's no cortisone reaction, there's no cortisol, that memory is able to be formed more efficiently, and we're able to recall that memory. We're also able to have more empathy and sympathy towards that action or that memory. And so the chemical process there not only helps us at a cellular level, but it also helps us, you know, with that feeling as well.
Dr. JJ, I know you wanted to jump in on there. I saw that. What do you want to share with us?
Sorry, I'm just trying to find my microphone.
Yeah.
I've got a new keyboard and it's a bit stressful. Vulnerability is such an unresearched environment. I mean, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
People glorify vulnerability in leadership as something that we should all work towards, and I think that's half the story. I think the other part of the story is what Buddhists speak about as life being suffering. And if you understand what that really means, it really means doing the shit stuff. Suffering is, cleaning the toilet. It's not, it's not sitting back and having a cigar. It's doing all the hard stuff. And if we look at that neurologically, we see that the anterior mid-cingulate cortex actually grows as a result of us doing stuff we hate. Okay, so by getting good at doing the bad, we become skilled at knowing what we don't do so well. Okay, so you can hear where I'm going with vulnerability now.
Yes.
Can you see where the M&Ms I'm dropping on the road?
Yep.
Okay, so the proposal is showing people vulnerability isn't a meek and thou shalt not hurt thy brother. It's about actually doing stuff that makes you know what it is like to be vulnerable so that you get good at it, so that it becomes a skill rather than not being angry. So Tanner, I don't disagree that being in Hell's Kitchen and being that bossy, grumpy bugger, whatever his name is, I don't think that is something we should not try and do. But I think there's also more than just not doing that, rather than being a meek, crucified, humble leader. I think there's some you can actually do. And I got thinking about this through the lens of Buddhism, but I saw this, I can't remember his name, but I'll find it if you guys like. It was a link to this guy whose name is, I don't know, I can't remember, it doesn't really matter, but he wrote this LinkedIn post around vulnerability and neuroscience. James Long or Lang, I can't remember, but he wrote a post, and I mean, I'm not considering myself a post expert, but it was absolute crap. And I'm going to find this post and I'm going to share it with you guys. And I'm going to ask you guys to tell me if you think this guy is vulnerable enough to hear. If he, he's speaking about the neuroscience of vulnerability and he's speaking about literally nothing neuroscience. So let me find this post before I take over the rodeo and get distracted with myself. I mean,
so one of the things before we I allow Jennifer and Dave and Michael to share their thoughts too. It was great. The reason why I called on you and you went right to it. Because that's one of the key points that I was going to use. Because during my research and on my one of my articles that I published on vulnerability and neuroplasticity is that the brain's plasticity plays a pivotal role in transforming vulnerability into an opportunity for growth. And it does that by adapting and reshaping our neural connections over time, because of exactly what you said. It is the foreign stuff, the stuff that we don't like doing or that we typically don't do. And that forces those neural connections to get start firing at different and really reshaping and connecting differently. So Jennifer, Dave, Michael, you guys want to share anything as far as that before we go to the next segment?
Yeah, just a little something. Working with a lot of people the way that I do, I see that vulnerability is really an invitation. And if instinctually we are social creatures and we need each other, this is part of our survival instinct. And of course, it does allow us to grow. That's a big major component, but also just to invite the connection
Yes.
and the building of that growth with other people in our close tribes, in our communities. And without that, we become very isolated. And of course, we know the downside of that. So I see it as invitation and growth and connection.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
I'll
Go ahead, Michael.
jump in. Yeah, interesting. Few thoughts. So here in Australia, for one of the most popular prime minister was Bob Hawke, and what was interesting is that he allowed himself to sort of whip in public years before it was acceptable for a leader to do so. In fact, I think he's famously whipped when Tiananmen Square has happened, and that never sort of tarnished his tough man image. So I think part of the problem is the possibility that we have projected onto leaders this idea that, the tough leaders or good leaders should be tough and therefore not cry. And it's a while for that for us to soften that image around the edges to a point where it is more acceptable. But as a human experience, I think, of course, it is very much part and parcel of the human experiences. We all start that with pretty much our major way of expressing distress, and I do think that as humans, we are collectively wired to respond to that distress. So when it is genuine, I'm not as savvy as you to describe which parts of the brains it triggers, but I'm pretty sure that there is an apparatus in the human experience that's meant to respond to it first and foremost with compassion, as such. And because a couple of people got a bit existential, I might offer a thought on that level, and that is that to a degree, I think so much of our life is about being in control.
Yes.
And aiming to assume that we have control in an uncontrollable world for the sake of survival. And so to be in a vicinity of someone who is admitting with body language and, with the transference of energy, you could call it, of not being in control is humbling to that vulnerability of us all as humans in the human experience. And I think that's what evokes a real sense of wonder when someone does it as a leader and it's genuine and it's attractive to us in that sense, because somehow it also offers our own somewhat subconscious reflection of being not in control.
You make such a great point with the sense of control. It's I'm chuckling because I've seen that so many times in professional settings where that's exactly it. Is some of these leaders that try to use that sense of power to be leaders is because they think that having that power gives them some kind of control, which it really doesn't at the end of the day, because if you're trying to scare people or force people into doing stuff, that works for a very short period of time before people figure that out, and then they just tune you out, or they do something different. So, I mean, that was a great point that you made there, Michael. Thank you for sharing.
I mean, can I ask Michael a quick point?
Absolutely.
Michael, so do you think that vulnerability is control, in the sense of it being an emotional ability to be resilient to feeling out of control professionally or in other situations?
I wouldn't use the word control in this case. I would dare say that it shows an element of trust in the unfolding experience. So if there was anything that would trigger the sympathetic nervous system into suspecting that it needs to be in control, then we're not going to have control over that, right? I mean, the brain will override any higher functions of thinking this is safe or not safe, and will just kick into action because that's what it meant to do first and foremost.
Yes.
So I think in some ways there is a sort of a sense of trust that allows us to do that, to express ourselves as such, and again open into the existential experience of being human, which is always about, am I going to breathe the next minute, right? Like eat lunch, don't be lunch. So when we're beyond those realms of the most sort of basic and primal aspects of our existence, I think that is where the attraction for us as spectators of that leadership comes in. I'm not sure if that answers what you asked, but that's the way that I would.
Far too brilliantly. Thank you so much, my friend.
Michael must have been reading my notes, because that perfectly segues us into our next segment.
Before we go to the next segment, can I raise an issue?
Absolutely.
Okay, because this is really a fascinating conversation. So I've got a real life situation going on with, I'm coaching several leaders of a publicly held organization. And the CEO is very visionary. And he recently read the new biography of Elon Musk and made it known that he really wanted everybody on his leadership team to be reading it. And so I decided, okay, I really should too. And what's fascinating about the book is that here we have an individual who really loves to be in control, who's very, very talented, because he's basically remade 3 industries. Yet, as a human being, in terms of character, is not exactly an admirable figure. And certainly is not somebody who expresses any vulnerability or who wants to actually really build much trust. He just wants people to in a weird, maybe some trust in a weird way. So, and what I'm concerned about is that the leaders who are reading the book will want to be more like Elon, as opposed to being more human than human-centric leadership. Is anybody else finding that Elon is an interesting example in this case that we don't quite know what to do with?
Wow, we're going down this rabbit hole. Okay.
If you want to save it for a different time, go ahead.
No. Let's dive in. I'm all about going down rabbit hole. Go ahead, Dr. JJ, and then I'll say a few things.
There is a lot to say about hero worshipping leaders. From Steve Jobs to Elon Musk to there's millions, or not millions. There's thousands of good leaders that are out there, and I think the answer is that there isn't a cookie cutting style of leadership, and I think the question on the table is, does a good leader or a good professional need to be vulnerable to be a good leader? Napoleon or Hitler didn't really bother about that, and things how that worked for them. Winston Churchill, for example, he wasn't really interested in kumbayaing so much, and so maybe that's the question, Liz, about is vulnerability is it like a requirement for today's leader?
And I would challenge a little bit more on that. It depends on the situation too. It depends on the organization. If you probably want to look at what are the goals, what is the strategic plan for this organization, because that would say a lot about the type of leadership that would be needed to get to the results that they're looking for. Because leadership, while I am a servant leader, true, I do understand other leadership types, and leadership, in a sense, it's situational. You in order for you to really be a successful in many different industries and many different organizations, you have to be able to adapt to what's going on at that time in an organization. For example, if you have an organization that's in flux and you have to do tremendous change, guess what? for a short period of time, you do have to be very, very autocratic. But then you have to know when to make that switch and not be autocratic. So it becomes situational. So that would be my recommendation on that. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in on that.
Right. And I think that's where it's bothering me, because Elon Musk basically owns his own companies. His boards of directors do not have much power, do not have much control. And yet the example of the organization I'm working with, it's a publicly held organization that also has a lot of employees who are not friends of the CEO or relatives of the CEO, like Elon does.
Yeah. So I mean,
it's a very different situation.
Yeah, I would recommend to that CEO to really, let's kind of, before we do this, can we see what the end game is? So what is the end game? And then you can be like, okay, this is the end game. Is this book the right one to take your team to the end game? And put that question back on him. All right. Anyone else want to jump in on that before we go to the next segment? Great conversation. I love this. Thank you for taking us down a rabbit hole.
If I may offer one more thought on this, Liz, and I think it's tricky when we come to outliers like Elon Musk or Steve Jobs for that matter. And it's actually interesting to observe in that corner the difference. I mean, they're both people who disrupted industries in a major way.
Yes.
Left an indelible mark in our sort of collective cultural technological evolution. And yet, if you ask people what do they remember mostly about Steve Jobs, it is likely that famous sort of address that he did to a university when he was already sick and showed some vulnerability in that address. And I think in some ways they were both autocratic in the way they run their companies, but Steve Jobs was quite different to Elon Musk in the way that they showed up in that as well. But what I wanted to share is a thought about the underlying, call it architecture, of the transition of us as a collective from a more autocratic, hierarchical, masculine leadership approach to a more feminine, interconnected, vulnerable approach. And in that, what you'll see is that there is not necessarily a conflict between specific narrative or in specific narrative, but a conflict or a transition in that architecture. So if, going to a classic case in the States, think about the transition from Obama back to Trump in that sort of filter, right? So we had a leader who was quite open to be vulnerable in the way that he was addressing people and speaking in public, versus the opposite of it, someone who's completely about, sort of power and holding on this sort of assumed personality in public. So I think for us as a collective, we need that transition. We need to keep looking for and encouraging leadership that allows itself to be vulnerability, because the evidence of what a leadership that does not, in this place, in this time in human history, it's clear that that's not the right kind of leadership, because it leads us to the precipice of existence as a collective.
Yeah, absolutely. In our current society and in the current workplace dynamics with the type of team members, employees that we have, there has to be a little bit of that. These type of people are seeking to really have some kind of purpose into what they're doing. And if they feel that if it is some type of or a big type of autocratic culture where you just go do what I say and you can't have opinions, feelings, thoughts, then it becomes hard to attract top talent. Great discussion. And I think it segues perfectly into our next segment. So when we look at vulnerability, vulnerability significantly contributes to the development of trust and authenticity within a team. And it does that by fostering an environment where openness and genuine communication can thrive. Let's talk a little bit about that. What are your thoughts and feelings on that?
I'll give you an example. I'm not quite sure if it's thriving would be the right word, but a very, very positive response. So I was part of a group in the spring and early summer, and we were talking about maybe 17 of us that were talking. And I was telling about an experience I had the day before our meeting. And I had to go to the hospital. And it was the first time in my life where I went into a cancer hospital. So seeing that word cancer scared the shit out of me. So as I was talking to the team about that feeling, I was surprised that the amount of empathy they gave me back. And then post meetings, even today, I'm still getting emails from that team asking about me, and then they sharing with me what they have been going through since then. So that idea, that transfer of vulnerability toward team growth is very, very real.
Absolutely, absolutely. And also it leaves that lasting impression on you. All right, who else wants to jump in on it? Come on, Tanner, this is right down your alley.
All right, I'll definitely jump in. So, you know, I think, you know, to touch on what JJ said earlier, you know, vulnerability is not the absence of difficult conversations, right? It's not the absence of rigor and framework and structure. Vulnerability sets the foundation for us to be able to say, we're in this together, right? And it doesn't mean that we're not going to have hard conversations. It doesn't mean there's not going to be high expectations. It means that through vulnerability, we're going to build trust with one another. And through that trust, we're going to be able to deliver on a much higher return than we would if it's just autocratic, or it is it's the fundamental difference between management and leadership, right? Yes. Management is saying that I am managing a process. You're essentially going to do what I tell you to do to get the delivered outcomes, right? But leadership says that I'm going to shape and mold you. And you, in turn, are going to shape and mold me in my leadership style. And we are going to grow through this process together to get to the delivered outcomes. And there's a beauty in that. There's a nuance in that. You know, to going back again to what Dr. JJ was saying, I've trained for a long time on mountaintops and valleys, right? Like mountaintops are great. When you get to the mountaintop, you have the beautiful view. You have the sense of accomplishment. You have, you know, you have that overwhelming good feeling. But the valleys are where we really learn our lessons, right? Dealing with those difficult situations, failing, you know, having the rope break as we're trying to climb a cliff face, like that's where we grow, and that's where we learn. That's where there's value in something like Strength Finders, right? So in Strength Finders, in the US, we have a tendency to focus on weaknesses, not strengths. And we see it a lot in our school system, right? So if somebody is struggling, if one of our students is struggling in math, right, but they do exponentially well in science and English, well, what do? We get the math tutors. You know, we direct all of our attention towards them learning math, right? Well, some people just aren't good at math. But some people are really good at English and science, you know, and we should be focusing them towards that. It doesn't mean that we don't pay attention to the weakness that they have in math. We still coach and support them through their weaknesses, because that does build neural pathways, right? It helps them with the tough problem solving. but we also have to encourage their strength. And in that, the only way that we're really going to find out what somebody's strengths are is to get to know them on the personal level, right? And to be vulnerable with them. I'm not going to match with every team member or employee that I have, right? But we can find some sort of common ground where we can build those trusts. And oftentimes that's through vulnerability.
Yeah, you make some really good points there, Tanner. As you were speaking, it just reminded me of a conversation I had yesterday with a leader and speaking specifically to what you just said of we tend to focus on what people's not strengths are. We focus on the areas that need improvement. And we do a lot of that when we do performance evaluations and things of that nature, which is not the right way to do it. When you're looking at a leader, if you want to take them from good to great, get them to the next level, get them to be an expert, let's give them more of what they're good at. Let them hone in on that they're good at so they can get it to that level of being an expert. They get to be great at it. And we figure out a way how to support those other areas where they're not as good. Because in reality, what leader is perfect? What human being is perfect? That doesn't exist. So why are we so hell-bent on trying to get someone to be great in everything, great, well-rounded person? I'm sorry, I don't agree with that. I agree on if you're good at something, we're going to give you more of it so you can become great.
Absolutely. And in our addressing of our leaders and our team members and our employees of what they're good at and giving them more of that and helping them focus less on what they're not good at, they start to grow and their sense of accomplishment grows and their ability to perform higher for you grows and their trust in you grows. Why wouldn't you want to encourage that?
Right. I agree. I also think, though, we have a situation where a lot of leaders don't like to give positive feedback. They don't like to recognize people for the good things that they're doing because they think that will make people weak, or maybe they give up control by doing so.
But that makes that leader weak, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So I mean, is some of this tied up in vulnerability as well, that leaders do not feel enough confidence to be able to share praise?
Yes.
Liz, I've had a saying for a long time that I never want to cage my birds, right? I want my birds to fly as free and as far as they possibly can, and as far as they want to. And some birds, they want to stay, right? And others, they want to go. To me, a mark of a good leader is not the accolades or the awards, the trophies, or anything like that. It's how successful the people you've led have been.
Absolutely. Yeah. How far are those people that you are responsible for developing? How far can they go? How far have they gone? And that says a lot about a leader more than anything else. I agree wholeheartedly with
So
that.
does that mean Elon Musk is a bad leader because he hasn't got a talent pipeline?
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to come back to the Elon Musk thing, and I think we get caught up too much. And JJ, you hit the nail on the head. We get caught up in hero worship, right? We get caught up in the personality more than the performance.
There you go.
Right? No one can argue the performance of Elon Musk, and Elon Musk didn't do it himself, right? He didn't transform 3 industries himself. He had teams of people that for whatever reason, we're not going to get into the personality of it, but they bought into what he was trying to do. He's obviously been able to find talented people to work his pipeline of what he wants to get done. So I think it's easy to point to leaders like Elon Musk or Steve Jobs or Donald Trump. They're very polarizing individuals. We get caught up in the personality more than we do in the performance, you know.
Right, which is why I
but
often come back
personality
to
and vulnerability. Sorry, Liz, I want to just throw my confirmation on that, because we get confused between personality and vulnerability.
Yes.
And it's difficult to see Donald Trump looking vulnerable. I can't imagine how we'll be able to work through his personality to find his vulnerability. Anyway, I don't want to get into politics. That's a dead end. But Liz, please carry on.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I will often come back to the dog training, because dog training, we now know scientifically, works so much better when it's positive reinforcement. And the same thing works well with humans too, getting the dopamine to be able to know that you should be repeating certain behaviors because you're going to be rewarded for it.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. Jennifer, Cody, Michael, you guys want to jump in on there?
Cody, we can't hear you.
Cody, you're off mute, but we can't hear you. So give us a mime version of your comment.
Try again, Cody. Take yourself off mute. Let's see if we can hear you.
Anything now?
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yes.
Weird. I don't have anything to add per se. I'll wait for the next bullet point.
All right.
I mean, I stumbled on the point of personality and vulnerability. And, can you be vulnerable if your personality is sociopathic, if you have a disposition for control? I think of my father for a second, who was an absolute bastard, but in a good way, as you can and can't be, when he wasn't drunk and that kind of thing. But he just couldn't do vulnerability. And I mean, it wasn't just the sign of the times in being that age group, but he just didn't, personality-wise, get how this would be of any benefit. So the question on the table: can you untangle personality and vulnerability?
Well, I'll jump in on that real quick, because it's one of the points that I put on the agenda. So if we look at it in the context of vulnerability, I think one of the ways that you can do that is consistent and thoughtful exposure to situations that demand emotional openness. If you can do that, and it also put yourself in a situation where authenticity is needed. If you have those emotional openness situations, the authenticity, that's when the neural pathways associated with the emotional regulation of vulnerability, empathy, and learning, that's when they can start firing up. And that's my thoughts on that from a more science-based.
So I want to touch it.
Go ahead, Tanner. Go ahead.
So I want to touch on it just a second. So I think when we're talking about sociopathic individuals and their ability to show vulnerability, I don't think it exists, because sociopath by definition has no emotion. Yeah. Right. But when you're talking about kind of that hard line, JJ, you used your father for an example. In my household, the phrase "I love you" was not spread around a lot. I think by the time I turned 18, or by the time I left home, I count probably on one hand the times I heard that phrase, right? It's recognizing how people show their emotions. Because to say that my household, my family life growing up was absent or devoid of love as an emotion would not be a factual statement, right? But my dad was very similar in what you're saying. That he didn't seem to show vulnerability, but I know there were times when he was vulnerable, and I don't know how to explain the way he expressed that emotion, the way he expressed that feeling, because it wasn't what we have become accustomed to in today's culture. So I think it's also us recognizing, us taking a step back of what our expectations of vulnerability and emotion should look like, and looking at it from the lens of how do others process in that way, and how do we show up for them in those moments, which can be tough, especially when we're talking about deep personal dynamics with people that we're close to.
Wow, Tanner. Wow, you touch on so much, but I think well, no, I know, because when you were talking, I remember my my household when we were growing up, very similar. I don't believe as I was growing up later, and as I was older, yes, my dad was very affectionate, but my first 25, 30 years, zero, like zero. And I'm trying to think about like what you mentioned. I felt love, but it was never told to me. It wasn't in the sense of like, oh, giving you a hug, I love you, and showing that emotion. But it was more of and raising me correctly and doing the right things, and I guess role modeling it for me without that love and affection, that display of love and affection, I should say, because there was definitely love.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Amin, watch the sentence, Amin. I want you to listen carefully what I have to say. Amin, I deeply love you. And I mean that in a different way. Hey, Tanner Jr., how you doing, buddy?
So this is Sawyer, and I just want to display
Hey,
some love and
Sawyer.
emotion
Hey, so everybody
and some
wave to
vulnerability
Sawyer. Hey,
for him real quick.
Sawyer, how you doing? How you doing?
I love you.
Oh, we
That's
love you
so
too.
cool.
Oh, very good. You stole my love bubble, Tan. I was busy telling Amin how much I love him. And my belief, is that you can give love without expecting it back. And if you define it intelligently, and when I say I love you, I mean it through the lens of loving kindness. You can get lost in the sexual connotations. You can get lost in the gorilla beating the chest connotations, but it's very good to actually have another conversation around the communication we have because of our parents, because it's kind of programmed our brains, hasn't it? But I'm going off piece, but thank you. I'm really loving this conversation, and that's why I love you, or at least one of the reasons.
You're welcome. All right. So we have to start wrapping up. So everyone will have about a minute to say last words, and then I'll summarize some of the key points that we've discussed. So I'll start at the far right of my screen, and I'll go to Jennifer and let her say last words.
I too love this conversation because I think vulnerability is something that is not addressed enough. And we should really be normalizing it, but also through the lens of self-validation, and not, coming from a place of strength, coming from a place of ownership and openness. And I love that. And I think that everyone kind of collectively, that message is spread out, where we have to be strong, we have to know the answers, or else you're just going to be pushed to the back of the line. And I think that it just overlooks so many other opportunities for growth and sharing, and really seeing how far we can stretch together as a team, whether it's a corporate team or a family team. So yeah, I'm glad to have been part of this conversation today. Thanks.
Thank you, Jennifer. Turn it over to Michael.
Famous last words. What comes to mind for me is I think it was Martin Luther King said something along the line of, we must learn to live together as brothers, or we'll perish together as fools. So I certainly think that learning to live together in this day and age also means learning to be vulnerable together, because I cannot hold on to my opinions as being the only organized principle possible for a successful future. I need to consult, and I need to interact, and I need to collaborate with other people. I need to learn to live together. And I think in that sense, we sort of need to herald the edge of vulnerability in the way that we relate to each other. And there's a lot at stake in that sense. So we certainly, we're certainly going to stand and be counted in vulnerability in the coming years.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. Liz.
A great conversation, and I learned so much from all of you and get so many great insights. And it also makes me wonder, hearing JJ, Tanner, and Amin talk about their growing up years, which is similar to mine, if anybody has done any research on family situations like this and what's happened to the children, and do they tend to be more high achievers than not, or there's something else at play.
Wow, great perspective. No, maybe we can do it. All right, thank you, Liz. Thank you for that. And I'll say something at the end because I think I have an idea. Dave.
The conversation was good, but I wanted to go deeper in, say, maybe one topic and really drill into one part of the topic as opposed to staying on the surface. That's my only comment.
Thank you for that, Dave. All right, Cody.
I think the biggest takeaway that I have, or what I would like to continue the conversation looking at, is not only is vulnerability important for the aspect of the leader and learning how to lead by example, but also learning about others' vulnerability. And I think the time that it takes to dive into learning about oneself, being able to talk about those things with your team, I think that is priceless. And when you get multiple people talking about that, I think the world gets really small. I think we are able to relate to each other much more directly and much more intimately. So I hope we can continue that conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely. Tanner?
Wow, that's tough to follow with Cody. So the question is, what is the correlation between intimacy and vulnerability now? And how do we separate those from, kind of the thought of intimacy on a romantic level and into intimacy on a personal involvement level, and how it plays into interpersonal dynamics. So I'd love to dig deeper into that conversation. Yeah, this has been great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Dr. JJ.
I'm busy saying I've spoken too much today and I'm on mute again. Isn't that funny? The social neuroscience shows us that vulnerability makes you nicer and you get more friends and you kind of survive if you're living in a cave. And there's a great
You got on mute again. You just went on mute again.
Did it come through? I just said there's a great TED talk on vulnerability by Brene Brown. I dropped into the chat, which is really beautiful if you got the time to watch it.
Yeah. There's also she actually did also a podcast with Adam Grant. So their latest podcast, they went into parts of her TED talk, but it went even further. It's actually better if you listen to their podcast, and I'll drop it in the MPN Hub later on, which I just listened
Thanks,
to.
it'll be great.
Yeah, I listened to it a couple
Thanks
of
for
weeks.
today. I mean, what a cool event. No
Yeah.
pressure for next month.
No. So I just wanted to share a couple of things. Like, number one, I'm deeply thankful for those of you that joined us. Just to share a little bit of what's upcoming, so that everyone gets a good perspective. We're working through the CRAVE model. So next one will be empathy, and we'll do very similar again. Once we're done with the entire CRAVE model, to your point, Dave, we're going to just pick one specific topic within each and just dive completely all the way through. I wanted to make sure that we actually touch upon different parts of it, the first round of it, but then we will definitely be diving into one specific area and just speak for the hour long or however long we need to in order to really get a deeper sense and dive all the way through. So I just want you to know that is something that we will be doing moving forward. So in closing, I want to share some strategies that we can for all of you, but also for our audience once they listen to our roundtable. And it's some tips in navigating vulnerability. As we discussed today, cultivating a psychological safety, that environment where team members, employees feel psychologically safe to express their thoughts, ideas, and concerns is really, truly foundational to the work of vulnerability. Second, practicing self-awareness leads to understanding one's emotional triggers. It also speaks to the responses that allow leaders to approach situations with authenticity and emotional intelligence. Leaders who embrace their mistakes demonstrate vulnerability and a commitment to continuous improvement. They have this mindset that permeates the team culture and really drives excellence. Thank you all again for joining us. We will see you next month, and we'll be speaking on empathy.